Zaraketh had seen death before. As a veteran scout of the Galactic Defense Coalition, she had witnessed the aftermath of Void Reaper attacks on 17 different worlds. The twisted metal, the crystallized remains of organic matter, the eerie silence that followed their passing, all of it was burned into her memory banks. But nothing had prepared her for what she was about to experience on the frontier world of Kepler 442b. The distress beacon had been broadcasting for 3 standard cycles when her reconnaissance ship, Silent Wing, dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. What she found defied all tactical understanding. The Void Reapers had somehow breached the outer defensive perimeter without triggering a single early warning system. Their biomechanical vessels, looking like massive insects made of shadow and metal, had already begun their systematic harvest of the planet's population. Zaraketh's forearms moved across her control interface with practiced efficiency, her elongated fingers dancing over holographic displays as she analyzed the situation. Her species, the Veltar, were known throughout the galaxy for their analytical minds and strategic thinking. They rarely felt fear, their brains simply weren't wired for such emotional responses. Logic and calculation governed every decision, every action. The tactical display painted a grim picture. 17 Void Reaper harvester ships had established a perimeter around the planet's major population centers. Their smaller fighter craft swarmed like angry insects, systematically eliminating any resistance. The planet's defense grid had been completely overwhelmed within the first few hours of the attack. But something was wrong with the expected timeline. According to every simulation run by the Coalition's best military minds, a world of this size should have been completely harvested within 8 standard hours. Yet 3 full cycles had passed, and the Reapers were still fighting for control of significant portions of the planet's surface. Zaraketh's secondary brain, a unique feature of her species that handled complex calculations while her primary consciousness remained focused, began processing thousands of variables. Population density, defensive capabilities, geographical advantages, resource distribution. None of it explained the delay. She activated her long-range sensors and began scanning for life signs. What she discovered sent a ripple of confusion through her normally ordered thought patterns. There were survivors. Lots of them. And they were fighting back. The scanner identified multiple species signatures scattered across the planet's surface. Veltar civilians who had been visiting the agricultural colonies. Zephyrian traders with their crystalline exoskeletons. Even a few Makari diplomats whose massive, bear-like forms were easily distinguishable from orbit. But there was another signature that appeared far more frequently than any of the others, a species she had heard of but never encountered directly. Humans. The bipedal mammals from the 3rd planet of the Sol system were a recent addition to the Galactic Coalition. They had been granted provisional membership less than 50 standard years ago, primarily due to their rapid technological advancement and surprising diplomatic skills. Most civilized species regarded them as an amusing curiosity, a young race with interesting potential but little practical value in galactic affairs. Yet according to her sensors, there were nearly 12,000 humans on the planet's surface. And, somehow, impossibly, many of them were still alive and actively resisting the Void Reapers. Zaraketh's logical mind struggled to process this information. Humans were classified as a Class 7 species, moderately intelligent, technologically capable, but physically unremarkable. Their homeworld gravity was actually lower than standard galactic norm, their atmospheric requirements were fairly restrictive, and their natural lifespans were barely a tenth of what most advanced species enjoyed. By every reasonable measure, they should have been among the first casualties when the Reapers arrived. She adjusted her sensors to focus on the largest concentration of human life signs, located in what appeared to be a mountainous region on the planet's northern continent. The area was heavily forested, with numerous cave systems and deep valleys that could provide natural defensive positions. But, even accounting for geographical advantages, the tactical situation made no logical sense. Her communication array crackled to life, broadcasting on emergency frequencies. Multiple voices filled her cockpit, species speaking in their native languages, panic evident in every transmission. But, cutting through the chaos was something unexpected, calm, measured human voices coordinating what sounded like a large-scale military operation. Bravo Company, this is Command. Adjust fire pattern Delta 7 on grid reference 445 to 221. Over. Command, this is Bravo Actual. Pattern Delta 7 implemented. Enemy advance has been halted. Requesting ammunition resupply on our position. Over. Copy that, Bravo. Supply run incoming in 15 mics. Hold your position and prepare for possible flanking maneuver from the east. Command out. Zaraketha's language processor automatically translated the human military terminology, but the content was what stunned her. They were speaking as if they had the tactical advantage. As if they were winning. She made a decision that went against every protocol in her reconnaissance manual. Instead of maintaining observation distance and reporting back to Coalition Command, she began a descent toward the planet's surface. Her scientific mind demanded answers, and her strategic training recognized an opportunity to gather intelligence that could prove crucial to the overall war effort. The Silent Wing stealth systems were among the most advanced in the Coalition fleet. She was able to penetrate the planet's atmosphere without triggering the Void Reaper's detection networks, though she noticed with professional interest that several human installations were actively jamming enemy sensors with remarkable effectiveness. As she descended through the cloud layer, the scope of the battle became visible. The northern continent was scarred with impact craters and burn marks from energy weapons. Void Reaper ground forces, horrific biomechanical constructs that stood 3 meters tall and moved with insectal efficiency, had established forward positions throughout the lowland areas. But they hadn't advanced into the mountains. Zaraketha's sensors detected massive explosions occurring at regular intervals along the foothills. Each detonation was followed by the distinctive energy signatures of dying Void Reaper units. Whatever the humans were doing, it was effective enough to stop an enemy that had conquered 14 star systems in the past galactic year. She found a suitable landing site in a valley approximately 20 kilometers from the largest concentration of human signals. The Silent Wing touched down with barely a whisper, its landing thrusters carefully calibrated to avoid detection. Zaraketh sealed her environmental suit and activated her personal stealth field before disembarking. The gravity on Kepler 442b was roughly 30% heavier than her homeworld standard, uncomfortable but manageable. The atmosphere was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of chemical explosives. In the distance, she could hear the distinctive whine of Void Reaper energy weapons mixed with the sharp crack of what her tactical database identified as human kinetic firearms. She moved carefully through the dense forest, her natural agility allowing her to navigate the rough terrain with minimal noise. The Veltar had evolved on a world of towering crystal formations and deep canyons, environments that required exceptional climbing abilities and spatial awareness. After nearly an hour of careful movement, she crested a ridge and found herself looking down into a valley that defied every tactical assumption she had ever held about warfare. The humans had turned the entire valley into a fortress. Defensive positions had been carved into the hillsides with military precision. Camouflaged bunkers overlooked carefully planned kill zones. Supply lines ran through covered trenches that zigzagged across the valley floor. And everywhere she looked, humans moved with purpose and confidence that seemed completely at odds with their desperate situation. But it wasn't just the defensive preparations that shocked her analytical mind. It was the diversity of the force she was observing. Mixed in among the human soldiers were representatives of nearly every coalition species. She spotted Veltar civilians who had somehow acquired military equipment and were operating heavy weapons systems. A group of Zephyrian traders were using their natural electromagnetic abilities to disrupt Void Reaper communications. Even the Makari diplomats had been integrated into the command structure, their massive frames serving as mobile heavy weapons platforms. At the center of it all was a human command post built into a natural cave formation. Communication arrays had been hastily installed, and she could see multiple species working side by side to coordinate the defense. What she was witnessing went against everything she understood about interspecies cooperation. Most coalition military units required months of integration training before different species could work together effectively. Yet these humans had somehow organized a multi-species resistance force in a matter of days. A rustling in the underbrush behind her triggered Zaraketha's combat reflexes. She spun around, her stealth field shimmering as she prepared to defend herself. What she found was a human soldier, apparently no older than a juvenile by coalition standards, pointing a kinetic rifle directly at her center mass. The human's face was covered in camouflage paint, but she could see intelligent brown eyes studying her with surprising intensity. Despite the obvious size and technological advantages Zaraketh possessed, the young soldier showed no signs of fear or hesitation. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to power down your stealth field and identify yourself," the human said in accented but grammatically correct Galactic standard. "We've got Reaper infiltrators using similar tech, and I can't take any chances." Zaraketh's mind raced through tactical calculations. The human was alone and armed with primitive projectile weapons. She could easily overpower him and continue her reconnaissance mission. But something in his demeanor, the calm confidence, the professional bearing, made her reconsider. She deactivated her stealth field and slowly raised her hands in the universal gesture of peaceful intent. "I am Zaraketh of the Veltar Reconnaissance Corps," she said. "I received your distress beacon and came to assess the tactical situation." The human's weapon never wavered, but she noticed his posture relax slightly. "That's good to hear, ma'am. We can use all the help we can get." He activated a small communication device attached to his collar. "Command, this is Eagle 7. I've got a friendly contact at Observation Point Delta. Requesting permission to bring her in." The response came immediately. "Eagle 7, command. Confirm species and credentials, then escort to CP for debrief. We need intel on Reaper fleet disposition." "Copy, command. Eagle 7 out." The human looked back at Zaraketh with what she was learning to recognize as a human expression of cautious optimism. "Ma'am, if you're willing, my commanding officer would like to speak with you. We've been fighting blind up here for 3 days, and any information about what's happening in orbit would be incredibly valuable." Zaraketh found herself nodding before her logical mind could fully process the decision. Something about this young human's manner, the combination of respect and competence, had bypassed her usual analytical filters. "Lead the way, soldier." As they made their way down into the valley, Zaraketh began to understand what had been nagging at her subconscious since she first detected the human life signs. It wasn't just that they were surviving against impossible odds. It was how they were doing it. Every defensive position she observed had been carefully planned to maximize both offensive capability and crew survivability. Supply lines were redundant and well protected. Command and control structures were distributed to prevent single-point failures. Most impressively, the entire operation showed signs of adaptive tactical thinking, the ability to modify strategy in real time based on changing battlefield conditions. These were not the hallmarks of a primitive species fighting for survival. These were the tactical innovations of a race that had been thinking about warfare for a very long time. The command post carved into the hillside was a marvel of improvised engineering. What had probably been a natural cave system just days before had been transformed into a sophisticated military headquarters. Power cables snaked along the walls, feeding banks of communication equipment that hummed with activity. Holographic displays showed real-time tactical information, while multiple species worked together at stations throughout the complex. Zaraketh's escort, who had introduced himself as Corporal Martinez during their descent, led her through a checkpoint manned by a Zephyrian whose crystalline exoskeleton sparkled with embedded electronics. The alien scanner operator barely glanced up as they passed, though Zaraketh noticed the sophisticated biometric sensors that had undoubtedly cataloged every detail of her physiology. "Impressive security setup," she commented to Martinez. The young human shrugged, a gesture Zaraketh was beginning to recognize as uniquely human. "Staff Sergeant Chen says you can never be too careful. We've had 3 Reaper infiltration attempts since we established this position." 3 attempts? And you detected all of them? "Yes, ma'am. Turns out humans are pretty good at spotting things that don't belong." Martinez's tone carried a hint of pride that seemed entirely justified given the circumstances. They entered the main command chamber where Zaraketh found herself face to face with the most unlikely military commander she had ever encountered. Colonel Sarachin stood barely 1.7 meters tall, shorter than most coalition species, and appeared to be somewhere in her 4th decade of life. Her black hair was pulled back in a functional style, and her uniform showed signs of recent combat. But it was her eyes that captured Zaraketh's attention. They held a depth of experience and tactical awareness that reminded her of coalition generals with centuries of service. "Colonel Chen, this is Zaraketh of the Veltar Reconnaissance Corps," Martinez announced. "She received our distress beacon and has information about the Reaper fleet disposition." Chen looked up from a tactical hologram and fixed Zaraketh with an appraising stare. "Welcome to Firebase Alpha, Scout Zaraketh. I'd offer you refreshments, but we're running a bit low on amenities at the moment." The human's voice carried traces of exhaustion, but her posture remained alert and commanding. "Colonel Chen," Zaraketh began, "I must admit your tactical situation is far more stable than expected." My sensors indicated significant Void Reaper resistance, but the defensive positions I observed are remarkable. A slight smile played at the corners of Chen's mouth. Thank you for the compliment, but we're not exactly stable. We're buying time, nothing more. She gestured toward the tactical display. Take a look at this and tell me what you see. The hologram showed a three-dimensional representation of the entire planetary theater. Red indicators marked Void Reaper positions while blue indicators showed coalition forces. At first glance, the situation looked desperate. The humans and their allies controlled perhaps 15% of the planet's surface, concentrated primarily in mountainous regions that offered natural defensive advantages. But, as Zaraketh studied the display more carefully, patterns began to emerge. The human positions weren't random defensive clusters. They formed an interconnected network of mutually supporting strongpoints that controlled key geographic features across 3 continents. More importantly, they had established what appeared to be secure communication links between all major population centers. You're coordinating a planet-wide resistance, Zaraketh realized. Every defensive position is part of a larger strategic framework. Exactly, Chen confirmed. We've got 47,000 coalition civilians scattered across 17 different defensive complexes. Most of them are non-combatants' families who were visiting agricultural settlements, trade delegations, research teams. When the Reapers hit, the evacuation systems failed completely. Standard protocol called for each group to find defensive positions and await rescue. But you coordinated them instead. Someone had to. Chen's tone was matter-of-fact, as if organizing a planet-wide military resistance was a routine administrative task. The Reapers have a standard tactical doctrine: establish orbital superiority, eliminate communication networks, then harvest population centers in order of strategic value. They're very efficient, but they're also predictable. Zaraketh's analytical mind immediately grasped the implications. By maintaining communications and coordinating defensive efforts, you force them to modify their standard approach. More than that, Chen said, pointing to a series of red indicators that were flashing slowly. We've actually forced them to commit ground forces to areas they would normally bypass. Every hour they spend trying to dig us out of these mountains is an hour they're not harvesting civilians in the lowlands. A Makari officer approached the command station, his massive frame somehow moving with surprising stealth. Zaraketh recognized him as Ambassador Thurek, whose diplomatic credentials were well known throughout Coalition space. The sight of a respected ambassador wearing improvised body armor and carrying military communications equipment was jarring. Colonel, Thurek rumbled in his deep bass voice, Firebase Charlie reports successful interdiction of the Reaper supply convoy. They destroyed 6 harvester transports and captured significant intelligence materials. Chen nodded approvingly. Outstanding. What's the intelligence assessment? Most interesting, another voice interjected. Zaraketh turned to see a Veltar civilian approaching the command station. She recognized him as Dr. Velnaren, a xenobiologist whose research on Void Reaper physiology had been instrumental in developing coalition defense strategies. Dr. Velnaren, Zaraketh acknowledged her fellow Veltar with a gesture of professional respect. I did not expect to find you in a combat zone. Nor did I expect to be here, Velnaren replied. I was conducting research at the agricultural station when the attack began. Colonel Chen's people evacuated the civilian researchers to this position. He paused, his secondary brain clearly processing complex calculations. However, I have made observations that may prove significant to our understanding of Void Reaper tactical doctrine. Chen leaned forward with obvious interest. What kind of observations, Doctor? The Reaper forces attacking this planet are behaving in ways that contradict their established patterns, Velnaren explained. Typically, they employ overwhelming force to achieve rapid conquest. But, here, they have been drawn into prolonged engagements that reduce their operational efficiency. They're making mistakes, Zaraketh realized. More than that, Velnaren continued. They appear to be adapting their tactics in real time, which suggests either advanced artificial intelligence or direct command oversight. Both possibilities have disturbing implications for coalition defense planning. Chen studied the tactical display with renewed intensity. Doctor, are you saying the Reapers are learning from our defensive strategies? It appears so. Each successive attack has shown increased sophistication in countering your tactical innovations. However, Velnaren paused significantly, they are also making errors that suggest unfamiliarity with human psychological warfare techniques.
Before Chin could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the command post. A Zephyrian communications operator called out over the noise, "Colonel. Multiple contacts approaching from the southeast. Configuration matches Reaper assault formation, estimated 30 ground units plus air support. Time to intercept?" Chen asked, her voice remaining calm despite the obvious threat.
14 minutes to weapons range, the operator replied. Chen immediately began issuing orders with a speed and precision that impressed Zaraketh's military training.
Alert all defensive positions. Implement Engagement Protocol 7.
Martinez, get our guest to the observation bunker, she'll want to see how we handle Reaper assault tactics.
As the command post erupted into controlled activity, Zaraketh found herself being escorted to a reinforced observation position that overlooked the valley's main approach routes.
Martinez handed her a set of human-designed tactical binoculars and pointed toward a series of ridgelines approximately 3 kilometers distant. "They'll come through that pass," he explained. "It's the only approach that gives them cover from our heavy weapons emplacements. What they don't know is that we've prepared a few surprises." Through the binoculars, Zaraketh could see the first signs of movement as Void Reaper ground forces began their advance. The biomechanical constructs moved with their characteristic insectal efficiency, using natural cover and tactical formations that had proven effective on dozens of conquered worlds. But, as she watched, she began to notice things that struck her as unusual. The Reaper advance was more cautious than typical, with extensive use of reconnaissance drones and probe attacks on what appeared to be secondary defensive positions. They were clearly expecting significant resistance. "Colonel Chen was right," she murmured to Martinez.
"They're adapting their tactics." "Yes, ma'am," Martinez replied.
"But, so are we." The first explosions came without warning. Hidden charges detonated throughout the pass, sending clouds of rock and debris cascading down on the advancing Reaper forces. But these weren't random demolitions, they had been precisely calculated to channel the enemy advance into predetermined kill zones. As the dust cleared, Zaraketh could see that the Reaper formation had been split into smaller groups, each now forced to advance through narrow corridors that were covered by overlapping fields of fire from concealed human positions. What followed was unlike any battle she had witnessed in her years of military service. The humans didn't simply defend their positions, they actively manipulated the battlefield, using carefully timed explosions, smokescreens, and electronic warfare to force the Reapers into disadvantageous positions. More remarkably, they coordinated these efforts across multiple species with an efficiency that defied explanation. Veltar civilians operated artillery systems under human direction. Zephyrian traders used their electromagnetic abilities to disrupt Reaper communications at precisely the right moments. Makari diplomats provided mobile fire support that could relocate rapidly between defensive positions. "How?" Zaraketh asked Martinez. "How did Colonel Chen manage to integrate so many different species into an effective fighting force so quickly?" Martinez considered the question for a moment before answering. "I think it's because she doesn't see species differences as limitations, ma'am. She sees them as tactical advantages. Every alien ability, every piece of non-human equipment, every cultural perspective, she figures out how to use it to make us stronger." As if to illustrate his point, a series of controlled avalanches began cascading down the valley walls. The timing was perfect, cutting off Reaper retreat routes while leaving escape corridors for any coalition forces that might need to withdraw. Zaraketh realized that this level of coordination required not just tactical brilliance, but an intuitive understanding of how different species would react under combat stress. The battle continued for nearly 2 hours, with the humans and their allies systematically dismantling the Reaper assault force through superior positioning, tactical innovation, and seamless interspecies cooperation. When the last enemy unit finally withdrew from the valley, Zaraketh found herself staring at a battlefield that told a story she had never expected to witness. For the first time in recorded galactic history, Void Reapers had been decisively defeated in ground combat. The aftermath of the battle revealed something that challenged everything Zaraketh thought she understood about warfare. As human medics and their alien allies moved across the battlefield, they weren't just treating their own wounded. They were also providing medical assistance to disabled Void Reapers. "This is unprecedented," she said to Dr. Velnaren as they observed the recovery operations from the command post. "No coalition force has ever attempted to capture Reaper ground units." The xenobiologist's secondary brain was clearly processing multiple calculations simultaneously. "Indeed. Most fascinating is that the humans appear to have developed techniques for safely disabling Reaper biotech without triggering their self-destruct mechanisms. Colonel Chen approached their observation position, her uniform showing fresh combat stains but her demeanor remaining remarkably calm.
Dr. Velnaren, we've got 3 intact units ready for examination. I'd appreciate your expertise in figuring out what makes these things tick. You captured 3 of them alive? Zaraketh asked incredulously. Alive might not be the right word, Chen replied. But, functional, yes. Turns out electromagnetic pulse weapons can disrupt their control systems without destroying their primary functions. We discovered that by accident during the second attack 3 days ago.
As they spoke, a human soldier approached carrying a communication device.
Colonel, we're receiving a transmission on the emergency frequency.
Source appears to be Coalition naval forces. Chen activated the device, and Admiral Thexvar's distinctive Altarian voice filled the command post.
This is Admiral Thexvar commanding Coalition Fleet 77. Kepler 442b ground forces, please respond.
We are preparing orbital bombardment to clear Reaper positions for evacuation operations. Chen keyed her transmitter immediately.
Admiral Thexvar, this is Colonel Sarah Chen commanding ground forces on Kepler 442b. Be advised that orbital bombardment is not required.
We have the tactical situation under control. A long pause followed before the Admiral's voice returned, clearly skeptical. Colonel Chen, our sensors indicate 17 Reaper vessels in system.
Your position is untenable.
Prepare for immediate evacuation. Sir, with respect, evacuation is not necessary. We have successfully engaged Reaper ground forces and established defensive superiority across multiple fronts. We also have intelligence materials that could prove vital to coalition defense planning.
Another pause, longer this time. Colonel, are you claiming that human ground forces have defeated Void Reapers in direct combat? Not just human forces, sir. We've integrated coalition civilians from multiple species into effective fighting units. The tactical innovations developed here could revolutionize our approach to Reaper incursions. Zaraketh could practically hear the Admiral's disbelief through the communication link. Colonel Chen, maintain your positions. I am dispatching reconnaissance units to assess your situation. Do not, repeat do not, engage Reaper forces without direct authorization. Chen's expression showed the first signs of frustration Zaraketh had observed.
Admiral, the Reapers are already engaged. We've been fighting them for 4 days. We're not sitting around waiting for permission to defend ourselves.
Colonel, you will follow coalition protocols or face court-martial proceedings. Hold your positions and await further orders. Fleet command out.
The communication link went dead, leaving an uncomfortable silence in the command post. Chen stared at the device for a moment before setting it aside with obvious annoyance.
Bureaucrats, Martinez muttered under his breath.
Careful, Corporal, Chen warned, though her tone suggested she shared his sentiment.
The Admiral is following standard protocols. The problem is that standard protocols don't account for what we've accomplished here.
Dr. Velnaren stepped forward, his analytical mind clearly working through the implications. Colonel Chen, perhaps you could explain your tactical innovations to Scout Zaraketh.
Her reconnaissance report could provide Admiral Thexvar with the objective analysis needed to understand your achievements. Chen nodded slowly. Good thinking, Doctor. Scout Zaraketh, would you be willing to observe our operations more closely? I think your professional assessment could help convince Fleet Command that we're not just making desperate last stands here.
Zaraketh found herself agreeing before her logical mind could fully evaluate the request. Something about the human colonel's confidence was infectious, despite the apparent impossibility of her claims. Over the next several hours, Chen provided Zaraketh with a comprehensive tour of the human defensive network. What she discovered challenged every assumption about both human capabilities and Void Reaper tactical doctrine. The humans had identified and exploited weaknesses in Reaper operations that no coalition strategist had ever recognized. They had discovered that Reaper ground forces relied heavily on centralized command protocols, making them vulnerable to communications disruption. They had learned that Reaper biomechanical units had predictable response patterns that could be manipulated through careful psychological warfare techniques. Most importantly, they had proven that Reapers could be not just defeated, but captured and studied. The key insight, Chen explained as they toured a captured Reaper containment facility, is that they're not actually as adaptable as we thought. They have sophisticated response protocols, but those protocols are based on predictable behavioral assumptions about their enemies.
What kind of assumptions?
Zaraketh asked. They expect their enemies to behave logically, Chen replied. Coalition tactics are based on minimizing casualties and preserving resources. Standard military doctrine focuses on efficiency and calculated risk assessment.
But humans don't always think that way.
She led Zaraketh to an observation window overlooking the containment area where 3 disabled Reaper units were being studied.
We're willing to take risks that other species wouldn't consider.
We'll sacrifice tactical advantages to achieve strategic goals. We'll put ourselves in danger to save civilians we've never met.
That sounds like poor military planning, Zaraketh observed. Maybe, Chen agreed. But it's also completely unpredictable.
The Reapers have tactical responses for logical opponents. They don't have responses for opponents who make decisions based on emotional rather than analytical criteria.
As if to illustrate her point, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. A communications operator called out, "Colonel, Firebase Delta is reporting Reaper assault on civilian evacuation convoy. They're requesting immediate support." Chen didn't hesitate. "How far out is Firebase Delta?" 40 kilometers, ma'am.
Beyond our artillery range.
What assets do we have available for rapid deployment?
2 atmospheric craft, but they'd be flying directly through Reaper air defense networks.
Without pause, Chen began issuing orders.
Prep both aircraft for immediate departure. I want full medical and engineering teams aboard, plus enough firepower to punch through a reinforced Reaper position. Ma'am, the operator said carefully, tactical analysis indicates a 70% probability of aircraft loss.
Noted, Chen replied. Launch in 15 minutes. Zaraketh watched this exchange with growing amazement. By any rational military standard, Chen's decision was strategically unsound.
She was risking valuable assets and experienced personnel on an operation with poor odds of success. The civilians at Firebase Delta were probably already lost. Sending rescue forces would likely only increase casualty numbers. But, as Chen continued coordinating the rescue operation, Zaraketh began to understand what made human tactics so effective against Void Reapers. They weren't just fighting to win military engagements. They were fighting to preserve something that most species considered secondary to tactical victory. They were fighting for each other. Colonel, Zaraketh said as Chen prepared to board one of the rescue aircraft, this operation violates established military doctrine. You're risking strategic assets for minimal tactical gain. Chen paused in her pre-flight checks and looked directly at Zaraketh.
Scout, you're absolutely right. By coalition standards, this mission makes no sense. But there are 200 civilians at Firebase Delta, including 15 children. If we don't try to save them, who will? Admiral Thexbar has evacuation ships standing by once the orbital situation is secured.
That could take days.
Those civilians don't have days. Chen resumed her equipment check.
Besides, every time we engage the Reapers, we learn something new about their capabilities.
This mission isn't just about rescue, it's about gathering intelligence that could save millions of lives across coalition space.
As the rescue aircraft lifted off into the smoke-filled sky, Zaraketh found herself questioning fundamental assumptions about military strategy that had guided her thinking throughout her career. The humans weren't just willing to take risks for emotional reasons, they were using those emotional motivations to achieve tactical objectives that pure logic couldn't accomplish. More disturbing was the realization that their approach was working. In 4 days of combat, they had achieved results that coalition forces hadn't managed in months of conventional warfare against the Void Reapers.
Dr. Valnaren approached her observation position, his expression showing the same confusion that Zaraketh was experiencing.
Most puzzling, he said. Every military simulation indicates that human tactical doctrine should result in rapid defeat against Reaper forces.
Yet empirical evidence suggests the opposite conclusion.
Maybe our simulations are based on incorrect assumptions, Zaraketh suggested.
Perhaps. Or perhaps human psychological patterns produce tactical advantages that our analytical methods cannot quantify.
Valnaren paused, his secondary brain clearly working through complex calculations.
Scout Zaraketh, I believe we may be witnessing the emergence of an entirely new form of warfare. Before Zaraketh could respond, the command post's communication systems erupted with activity.
Multiple voices were broadcasting simultaneously on emergency frequencies, but cutting through the chaos was Colonel Chen's calm voice coordinating what sounded like a successful extraction of the Firebase Delta civilians.
All units, this is Rescue Actual. Package is secure.
Repeat, all civilians are accounted for and en route to safe positions. Be advised, we have obtained significant intelligence on Reaper air defense capabilities.
Will brief upon return to base.
As Zaraketh listened to the rescue operation's success, she realized that her understanding of human capabilities had been fundamentally incorrect. These weren't primitive mammals playing at warfare. They were a species that had evolved an entirely different relationship with conflict itself. And, for the first time since arriving at Kepler 442b, she began to understand why the Void Reapers were having so much trouble conquering this particular world.
The rescue operation had returned with more than just saved civilians.
Colonel Chen's teams brought back captured Reaper technology, detailed reconnaissance data, and, something even more valuable, proof that human tactical innovations could be replicated by other coalition forces. Zaraketh stood in the command post's main briefing area, watching as Chen debriefed her officers on the mission results. The intelligence they had gathered was revolutionary. Human pilots had managed to penetrate Reaper air defenses using tactics that relied on unpredictable flight patterns and deliberate